Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Demo 2 of Assignment 5 for Concept Sketching. How's everybody doing today? Unfortunately, this is my third attempt doing this. Sadly, I recorded the whole video with my microphone not on, so we are going to get through this. We're going to have a great time. Okay, so diving right in, quick housekeeping things. Let's make sure that we have all of our assignments. Assignment 4, the kitchen appliance project, in Google Drive. By now, Ellie and I are going to start grading those pretty soon. Thank you guys again for generally just being flexible with all of this stuff. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the housekeeping, I believe. Oh, no, sorry, one more thing. Make sure that you guys are double checking that the grades in Canvas and the gradebook are correct based on what you're seeing in the Google Drive files that Ellie and I submitted for your feedback. So please just double check. There is, of course, a chance that we accidentally make a mistake, so it'll be helpful if you guys can help catch it. Like I said, we're going to be drawing a vacuum part today, so not the entire vacuum, just a part of it, because obviously the whole thing would be pretty significant to try and draw lots of parts. Okay. Alrighty, so just like we explored last time, I'm going to have images of this vacuum part open the whole time while we're drawing. I would like you guys to follow along with me. So now this first part, we are going to be planning our composition. So getting a feel for how large we want the parts on the page, how we want to place them, the general white space that we're going to be exploring. So right now, this part is generally somewhat cubish when you think about the overall volume of space that it occupies. So it's a really convenient shape to kind of start with, as a cube. So another thing to think about while you are planning your composition of your drawings is what information is really important, or what is most important. We've talked about this before in class and whatnot. So in this sketch, we're looking at doing two views, one of the front, kind of from the right, and then one of the back. There's obviously a lot of information to convey in the back with that kind of like circular intake, the somewhat round part, and then there's that green sort of plastic hook thing. Right now, I'm pointing out the white space, just considering like how much of the page we're taking up, the relationship between those. Are they even? Are they uneven? How do you want to style them? In this composition, planning on doing some overlap, also taking into consideration where something like a title might go if you want to give your product a name, which is totally cool, especially if it's like silly and fun. That's really, we like to see that kind of stuff just because it's more, imaginative, creative. You guys get to like have some fun with it too. So I would consider this very much like a thumbnail sketch, almost like a high fidelity sketch, to be honest, because there's a lot of detail in that for a thumbnail. But just really take the time to consider what you're laying out on the page and where it starts and stops, where your colors are going to go. Always remember, so even though it's a little bit difficult to watch me do a digital drawing and try and follow along while you're doing a real, like an analog drawing on paper, keep in mind that you should always be starting super thin with your construction lines. That way your drawing, your artwork doesn't get super messy. So right now I'm trying to plan out where the objects are going to go. So I'm doing a slightly higher accuracy drawing at the full scale of the page. Okay, so sorry for not making it crystal clear a minute ago, but now you should be following along. What we were doing before was just the planning step of our composition, so now we're really getting into the full drawing, setting up our construction lines. And so, yes, if you could be following along now, making sure that your construction lines are as light as possible, that would be super awesome and super helpful for your sketch. As you can see, the goal here is to make sure that there's a comfortable amount of white space, just general breathing room on either side of our objects. The goal is to get these really rough, cubes carved out into our shapes as quickly as possible, while also keeping in mind our other factors that are going to come in later, like the callouts and the titles and stuff. So you can see that I am like decreasing what we call the opacity, just the general darkness of the layers to make it easier for you guys to see what I'm doing, and increasing the like just general fidelity of each sketch, each new like pass essentially. So this first layer that was just grayed out was really getting the volume right, and then this new layer is about getting the more fine-tuned details, or the like the shape and the lines really situated in their right spot. I will be decreasing the opacity of this layer again when we get closer to the end, or closer to creating like the final line work essentially. And that's because I want you guys to see like the process and like a really good end result. Definitely like wouldn't hurt at all to skip ahead to the end just to see what it looks like. That way you guys kind of have a reference of what it could be. These lines right here, I'm pointing out how I am adding just a slight angle, so it is just a little bit in 3-point perspective like I talked about in Monday's video. So if you're confused by that, you should definitely go and rewatch the part in that video about 3-point perspective, so that that's crystal clear. So right now we are extruding that pill-shaped form that's going to form basically the main body, everything underneath the handle of this plastic housing. This demo, this sketch might seem a little bit more sketchy, a little bit rougher than, say, the rice cooker. So in that video, I had used a feature that this particular app called Procreate has called Auto Shape, where it makes a perfect shape for you, like perfect lines, perfect ellipses, and everything like that. I was conflicted on whether or not I was going to use that in the rice cooker demo video for a lot of reasons, and on this one I thought I would give it a shot without it. You guys, I would love to see or hear your thoughts in like the YouTube comments on whether or not you think it's more valuable to see the sketch without the like helpful shape builder tool, Auto Shape, or if you kind of like the sketchiness of this. Granted, again, like I have a lot of like tools and stuff to undo and fix the sloppy stuff, so it's not like the best indicator in the world. But yeah, would love to hear your guys' feedback. So here I'm realizing that my proportions are just a little bit off. I think the housing needed to be a little bit taller, so I'm redoing this line work of where we extrude the like pill shape to. And now, so that pill shape in the back is basically the profile of the handle. So in the other pictures of this vacuum part, you can see if you look around the object what the overall profile is. And so I use the center line from that X to find where to place that pill shape. And now I'm extruding that up. And so one thing to note from this aspect is that it'll be really, really valuable for you guys to have, the object that you're sketching in front of you, because you'll be able to reference it for all those little details that would be, that are really hard to communicate in this way with just like static images and whatnot. And I'm throwing apps around because I tried to double check that I was recording. And I am. Okay, so now the lines that I'm putting down are attempting to figure out that little, so there's a red circle that says Hoover on it, the little branding opportunity moment kind of thing. There's like a square piece of plastic that extrudes up out of the front, so I'm trying to place that. Once again, I'm taking advantage of my center line to try and figure out where that center is, and now I'm estimating the angle of where that handle comes in, and then pulling it out all the way to where that handle stops and the button starts. And these construction lines are referencing the vanishing lines. You can tell by looking at the various pictures that there's a like kind of divot in that handle at the top, to make sure to put that in so I don't forget it later. Now adding some mass to the handle, and then adding that kind of swoopy transition where the green kind of like dives down into the base of the handle. Here's a placeholder ellipse for that branding moment, the red Hoover circle. Now I'm throwing in the black structure where the button goes. Now there's the green part of the button. So we're already getting pretty close to having like the more nuanced structure to this component from this view. And yep, so I'm going to bring that opacity down again, turn off that layer, and now we're going to start putting in the real lines. So these are like sort of like the final go. We'll be starting with a really, really small line weight, and that will be changed later because I'm going to go over it again to put in the proper line weights. But for now, we're just going to keep it really, really light. So looking at the way that curve transitions, it looks like there's obviously like a cut out of it. And if you remember, we call that a chamfer. So there are different things that you could do to a corner, but putting a flat edge like this on it is called a chamfer. The other one is called a fillet, where you put a radius on there and make it nice and curvy. This one's sharp. So we're gonna add that chamfer to the edge, just like this. And then we're gonna pick that end, the end point where we want it to stop. And then basically we're just gonna draw a big swoopy line to connect them. And another. Okay, and it looks like there's some other interesting geometry going on back there, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. For now, let's focus on where this handle comes down into the main housing. So it definitely kind of appears as if it has like a rectangular prism is being cut into it. So in a way, we're kind of starting there. And if you look at the corner, like right to the right of that Hoover symbol, it looks like they add like a little chamfer to that as well. So basically going to start by adding that surface first. And that's how we'll start building the whole handle. And that edge will eventually be a leading edge. Don't forget our little swoop. And now let's put that other line in there. Okay, so now let's show where that material stops. So that new line is basically where the black plastic stops. And then the next line we draw will be where the green plastic stops. So I think we're going to look at what is happening behind the handle. And if you look at this picture, it looks like they added like kind of an elliptical object. So we're just going to draw a gentle part of an ellipse behind there to show that there's a gap. Okay, so now drawing the backside, we're just going to see a sliver of this thing due to the perspective, and we need to make sure that we are mirroring that chamfer. So if you imagine where that curvature keeps going is where we're going to start our imaginary chamfer, and then imagine it going up just like it does on the right side. Should look something kind of like that. And it looks like they added a fillet right there, like there's a gentle curve. And then we can put our ellipse in there. And there's obviously a lot of different surface changes to that branding moment, but we can convey a lot of that with just a surface contour line. So we'll come back to that later. We won't go super deep into that for now. So now we're going to be looking at extending the black plastic where it meets the green plastic, that curve. And then that will represent the bottom edge of the green plastic, and that just generally has a soft curve that goes downwards and just kind of disappears because it becomes flush with the rest of the green plastic. Okay, so now I think we're just going to be extending the edge lines of this black plastic. And it looks like they put a little bit of a radius on the back there, so we're going to make sure we add that as well. And so now we need to see where exactly and how exactly does that like downward curve end. And it looks like they just kind of put like a gentle stop. Okay, and so for the most part our handle's done. Now we just need to figure out where exactly our button goes. so that we know where we can stop the lines that represent the back of the handle. We're just going to throw that in real quick. And we should make sure that we put at least some space between the black plastic and the green plastic for the button, because it are two separate parts. Later we'll make sure to put some leading edge line weight up there to better express that. Okay, so right there, I was mentioning how we can think about the chamfer that goes back there, but in this view, this perspective, the handle actually covers enough of it that it wouldn't really matter, so we're not going to show it. And don't forget the little details, like this vent. And at this point, we're really, really close to being done with this whole object. Really, all we have left is to figure out how there's this extra surface sweep, this swoopy part that starts at the bottom of that handle intersection and then goes towards the back. And then if you guys could see it, that swoop actually doesn't make it all the way. Actually, that might not be true. Just kidding. Okay, so we're gonna start looking at that back corner that has that weird like chunk out of it. And so one way to figure out these kinds of tricky things is to imagine how it looks from like the bottom view, if you were to completely flip that over and then draw that in perspective, and you can see how it affects the rest of the geometry, as we say, the structure. So here we go. If you flip it over, you can kind of see better what that shape should be and how it should be cut out. Boom. Okay, so at this point, this one is pretty much figured out as far as the details. So I'm going to increase my line weight and start creating my leading edge lines. So these are your thick lines that go around the silhouette, and anything that can have or does have either space or a different material behind it. And this would be a really great time to increase the rate at which you're watching the video, or just skip ahead. As long, of course, as you're still following along. Remember, ellipses that have that represent like a hole in an object or a material should gradually change from a surface line to a leading edge line. And again, so just to reinforce, when you're drawing an object, make sure that you have it in front of you and you can turn it over and look at where the parts stop and start. It'll be super helpful when you're determining, which lines are your surface lines, which lines are your contour lines, etc. Because otherwise it's going to be much harder to kind of guess. So that line that I just drew, that thick line, is there because that's where the black plastic transitions to the green plastic. And so you definitely need that information there that says this is a change, this is different. I think this part, I'm noticing that the vent actually has some fillets on it, so we're going to address that and add another ellipse within that, and then add the line weight as well. Okay, so we're already getting really close. Yep, so there's that change again between the black plastic and the green plastic. Now, one thing that's important is right there, right now, I only have drawn one line when there should actually be two to represent one line for the black plastic, one line for the green. And so, yep, there it is, okay. So there's that other line that represents the change. One thing that we also need to look at is how does the handle actually interact with the main housing, and it looks like the handle actually goes down inside, so that would mean that we need to switch this line right here into a leading edge line because there's space between the top housing and then the handle itself, so that's why that got darker. We should be able to see maybe just a tiny bit of space around that curve. Okay, so this is looking good. So it's looking like we're ready to put our surface contour lines in so we can reference, okay, this is a good call out. So it looks like there's actually this little Hoover thing here is actually a different material. And so yeah, for sure it's a different material, and it's like an insert, so that should be a leading edge line right there to show that there is space behind the black plastic. And now this is our opportunity to use the surface contour line to show some of the added detail of that red part. We're not going to go super in depth with it in this though. Or this time, I should say. I think that plastic part has some more detail too, but we'll ignore that for this demo as well. And then we probably won't see the contour line continue behind that plastic button. So now using the metaphor of the laser, remember that it goes around every surface, 360 degrees. And I'm going to throw in another surface contour line around this top handle to reinforce both the fact that there's a curvature to that handle and then show how those surfaces interact and that the material changes. And then we can put one down here as well and show that big chamfer that comes out a little bit and then goes down, and then the other direction as well. Okay, so now this looks pretty good with the way that it is. I think it's now time to plan the drop shadow. So I'm referencing basically the bottom profile and just dropping it down a little bit. Since we don't have a lot of stuff sticking out, we'll just lift that object off of the ground just a little bit. And then please remember that we're just keeping the drop shadows really simple. Basically in this whole class, we don't like color it, we don't like charcoal it, just throw some hatching in there. Really, really simple, like messy lines is totally fine. Like this is perfectly accessible or acceptable, sorry, for your guys' assignments. Just keep it simple. Okay, now I'm gonna start a new layer to make sure these things are nice and clean for you guys to see. And now we're gonna be looking at the back. So now that I have my front view or the isometric, the first view done, I'm actually gonna like adjust my plan for the composition just a tiny bit to make sure that it's still gonna look good and feel good the way that they're like interacting with one another. So you could see from the original like cube that I had created, or rectangular prism, that it was a little bit like too far away, at least for me. So I'm gonna move it just a few hairs, and that's what this new box is gonna be, is just continuing to plan my composition and make sure I get it as neat and perfect as I want it. I'm going to drop that darkness again. And now I'm going to go ahead and get started with the bottom profile. And attempt 1, nope. Attempt 2, yes. And again, keep in mind that you should be keeping your line weights as light as possible at this point. You don't want these to get too heavy. So right now I'm using like a really dark, or I'm using like a black pen essentially, or brush. But you are gonna wanna try and be as light as possible during this like construction phase. So like normal, just extruding this up, trying to get the proportions as good as I can. And now it's time to try and find the center to start building the rest of the parts. Making sure all of these lines go to your vanishing points. So I'm starting with the back face of that handle. And I think that was just a little bit too thick. So I'm gonna bring in those lines a bit, make it a little bit thinner, make it feel a little bit taller. Once again, this is a kind of like pill shape. And up here, we're getting really close to the horizon line. So this object is below the horizon line, and that ellipse is going to get really, 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 really thin. Or I guess I should say short, honestly. And now it's time to start thinking about where is the center of that handle. And now let's extend those references so it has some width to it. And we'll use the vanishing point as a reference for where that should stop. And then let's give that handle some thickness. And don't forget the swoopy fun part. There's probably, we would see some curvature from the green part upwards like that as well. And I can throw in our button. If I remember correctly, I think I fixed that later because it doesn't look super great. I think the ellipses are a little too tall. Okay, so now I'm going to start looking at that back face, which has a lot of interesting things going on. And I'm going to start by cutting out those bits that are towards the corner, the bottom corner, first. Because before I can get to things like where the other parts are placed and the thickness of the plastic, that needs to be addressed first. So I'm trying to look at the various images to try and find a reference for how those surfaces actually come together. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I changed that because it's not as swoopy as I expected. I think it's sharp. Yep. Yeah, that's like a harsh geometric angle change. I'm going to leave that tiny little like reference point there as where the edge of my original box was. And the reason I'm leaving that there is for the end when I'm going to create a drop shadow. That'll just be a nice little reference point to be able to find again. Okay, so it looks like at this point I'm pretty much ready to start doing my final line work. I have like the general structure. Oh, wait, just kidding. Make sure I'm still recording. You don't have to do this a fourth time. Okay, yep, those chamfers. Yep, okay, so again, figure out where they start, and now it's time to look at where they stop. So that little dot right there was just kind of like a reference of like, this is where I need to aim for. And now this is actually kind of a tough thing to draw right here. I don't get it the first time. So that bottom basically like contour needs to meet that outside face. So I think I'm gonna make that, yep, there we go. There's the reference. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's kind of a fun shape because it's very intense as the like swoop transitions around that pill shape. Yep, and you can see on that far edge there's going to be like essentially material taken away, so that line will get pushed back further. Don't forget our little vent. Better vent. And now we're going to drop the opacity and now go and start working on the final line work. So I'm going to look at that. Like, so that's a rubber part. It's like some sort of like intake, air intake or something. I think it's where the hose actually sticks in. It's one of those vacuums where you can like remove the central canister part and it becomes like its own mobile unit thing. Okay, so again, now just trying to go over these lines and make them prettier, more consistent. So right there, I was basically inspecting how those plastic parts come together. It'll be really critical for you guys to see like something as complicated as this, there's a lot of like intricate engineering to it. So it'll be important to see like how all of these like edges and stuff interact with one another. So right now, adding the plastic thickness. Creating an estimation of where this like elliptical, this round face goes. And so some of the stuff in this back part actually gets pretty complicated. So for this demo, I know it's already kind of long. Basically just going to simplify it just a little bit. And then there's some parts that are kind of hard to see as well. And so I'm going to throw in some lines to kind of further simplify it for the sake of this demo and time. So right here, I'm trying to figure out where does that curvature, that curved edge stop, just create a reference. Yeah, you guys should have every confidence basically to be able to draw something like this. It's really just a matter of making sure you start with your cube, plan your composition, and then start cutting stuff out, start adding features. Think about them from like a construction standpoint. Is it a rectangular prism? Is it a cylinder? All of our things that we manufacture are based on these like pretty simple forms. So keep that in mind. If you see something that like feels overwhelming, you can definitely do it. And again, I'm going to simplify some of this stuff for the sake of the demo, because a lot of the general concepts that are needed to describe the other elements cover all of the things that I'm just simplifying. Okay, so right now, drawing the hole that the handle part fits in, so you can see how we should see just a tiny, tiny bit of the edges and the parts that it fits into. And I think we're about to look at that second little surface sweep. Yep, yeah, okay. So if you can see from this angle, the sweep actually doesn't like finish, like it doesn't complete at the edge. So just even showing those little swoosh swoosh, like just kind of end in the middle of nowhere, that's totally fine. There's a lot of like products that have those kind of features where there's like a surface change that just gradually just kind of disappears. So we can definitely expect to see some of that. So you can see how there's like a kind of elliptical or like almost spherical part that comes out of there. add that in. Okay, so that line was actually wrong. So that should go to a vanishing point. Yeah, that vanishing point. Okay, so I think we're going to take a look at this green locking mechanism in just a second. Add that little rounded edge. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about that center. Where is the center? And now we're going to be cutting a hole into that piece to create room for that part. So there's the bottom edge, there's the top edge, there's the back, and then there's the side profile. And then we just need to continue that line, and boom. Give that plastic some thickness, because we can't really see behind it because the picture's really dark. And that clasp is basically done. So really just thought about look at the side profile, draw that, and then extrude it. And it's good. And now we can draw that back edge because we know where that clasp is gonna start and stop. Okay, so I think this is where I mess up. This button stuff. I think the proportions could be a lot better too. I think I made it too thick. Yeah, those ellipses are too tall. But I think I come back to that later. So for now, start building the various surface changes of this handle piece. Just going to bring those down. And then there's the outside edge of the black part. And we're going to put that curvature in there, like so. And then now we can put our back line in. And there's where that cutout stops. And now we need to show where it stops on the other side. And there's a little bit of curve to it. And then there's that spherical-ish piece. There's the center. And then there's the back edge of the green part. Okay. So now it looks like we're pretty close to having just like the general final line work done. There's that fillet. Ah, yeah, okay, so that's where I fixed that. Yeah, so those ellipses need to be a lot shorter. Not perfect by any means, but just a little bit closer. Okay, so now we're able to start putting in our leading edge lines. Once again, probably a good time for you guys to either increase the playback speed or just jump ahead once you're done sketching these lines. So these ellipses right here, this like button componentry is a really good opportunity to practice those gradual transitions where the leading edge line gradually transitions to a surface contour line. And right there, same story. That should gradually change from a contour edge line to a surface line. And we can see that this is the spot where the black plastic transitions to the green plastic, so that should be a leading edge line because we know that there's space between them. And now we need to make sure that we're communicating that transition between the black and the green plastic. So this part right here is actually pretty important. So I messed it up the first time. Undo. Okay, so this is really important because the black plastic has the leading edge line, and then right at this curve, it actually transitions, and then that leading edge line should continue existing on the green plastic. And that's based on what you can see based on this perspective. So you can actually see both faces of the black plastic, but you cannot see both faces of the green plastic. That would make more sense when you guys are actually looking at physical products in front of you that have that kind of play of parts. So now we're moving on to this rubber intake cylinder. And again, this is a simplified version of what is actually existing on that back part. Okay, so now we're basically done with the line weights, so now it's time to go back and put in our surface contour lines. Now, I think in my attempt to simplify this, I made some mistakes. So that part right there actually does not, that part is not correct. So continuing on, our laser line, based on the metaphor we used before, will continue along, and we'll just barely see it because it's in that little channel, but it will continue on the underside. And that dips in, comes back. Oh yeah, forgot that edge. Drop that down, mine the swoops, and I'm just going to add some other little surface details to better explain this intake piece. And now, upon realizing this, opportunity to fix this line weight, make that a leading edge line with the gradual transition. Okay, so I think this is looking pretty close to done, although I actually just realized I missed a line. A leading edge line. So just like before, we're just dropping that profile shape to create a drop shadow, just a little bit so it appears to be floating. Once again, we don't need anything complicated for the shading. It's not a fine arts project, just some simple hatching would be just fine. Okay, so now we're pretty much finished. All that's left now is to add some of our final details, like titles, callouts, etc. Oh, actually, this is a good opportunity to tell you guys about arrows. So if you want, you can explore drawing 3D arrows that indicate some kind of like functionality or movement. So this button obviously moves up and down. So I'm going to draw an arrow for you guys, showing you what a simple arrow can look like when you just give it a little bit of mass. It's definitely not the like focal point of your sketch by any means, so I would make sure that you don't make it too heavy, you don't make it too bold. It shouldn't be super important. I think here I add just a little bit more line weight to it, but that is by no means super important, and I definitely would not give it the same line weight as like a contour edge, a leading edge line, because then it becomes pretty distracting because your sketch is actually what's important. Essentially, the arrow, of course, as you can see, is pretty simple rectangular prism with like a triangular extrusion attached to it. Very easy. You guys can definitely handle that. So I thought about pulling those down off the corner of the page, but I actually kind of like the way that it comes off the page. A little bit more interesting. Now I'm going to give this creation a title. And I'm going to be writing some more stuff, so I want this brush to behave a little bit differently, more like a real pen. And again, so you guys don't absolutely have to use like anything definitive in your callouts. They can be, you could pretty almost write whatever. I just want to see you guys playing with them, exploring them, trying to understand how they impact your overall composition. So even if they're like really simple, that's totally cool. Just want you guys to practice. And do not forget your name, please. Bottom right hand corner. Okay, and there you have it, our vacuum cleaner part. Hopefully this is a good beginning into handle objects. Please refer back to the assignment document that is available in Canvas for any questions that you have. Or obviously, please feel free to email Ellie or I. We will get back to you.